on the third installment, the final installment of the Trial of McDonough. My name is Tim Tompkins. I am your judge today. And as the previous two episodes, we're sticking with the defense, Mr. Greg Esposito.
Ahoy, hoy, Your Honor.
And of course, the prosecution, none other than Mr. Dave King.
Hey.
Okay.
How's it going, everybody?
Great. Fat Albert prosecuting Dave. Prosecuting McDave.
Hey.
Man, you guys are crazy. So really excited to get started. We're going to go into essentially whether or not Ryan McDonough improved or ruined the Suns' culture. So far within this, we have talked about individual trades and transactions, as well as whether or not the Suns are in a better place after Ryan McDonough left as opposed to when he started. During the episode, chime in with your questions as the juror, as the watcher, either for the prosecution or the defense, and I will make sure that I get those in at the appropriate time. But before we get started with this final segment of the trial, we had a little bit of a three-way debate. Not the first time that we've had a three-way between us here on the show.
Hey now.
Hey now.
That was Vegas, and it's supposed to stay in Vegas, Tim.
We were essentially, Espo had sent over a top five, and Espo said this is pretty spot on. The top five Suns of all time that were listed in this was Steve Nash, Kevin Johnson, Walter Davis, Charles Barkley, and Amari Stoudemire.
Hold on, let's starting five lineup. ESPN put it out, not top five of all time. That's different. It's basically all point guards, but starting five, all time starting five.
Yeah. Right, well, right. Per position, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so 100%. And then it was interesting because I was like, well, where's Devin Booker? And, of course, Greg chimed in that, he doesn't deserve to be a all-time starting five shooting guard yet for the Phoenix Suns. So figured we'd start that off and see what your guys' take is on it.
Like, I'm not going to take a big enough beating in this episode as it is with what we're doing. You have to start it off like that, like as if I said Devin Booker's trash. Like headline: Espo is dick when it comes to Devin Booker. Like, let's make it clear. I simply said Devin Booker isn't the greatest shooting guard of all time on this team yet, especially if you're going to wind up doing the way that ESPN went, where they basically turned Kevin Johnson into a shooting guard despite being a point guard.
Hey, let me just talk for just a second so I can get myself on screen so everyone isn't staring at the fact Tim left the goddamn room again.
At least he unbuttoned
during the show.
At least he unbuttoned his jacket before.
Yeah, I've got to at least say a few things so my face pops up and you don't look at an empty chair of Tim's.
So let me make this. I was not saying Devin Booker is not great. I was not saying that he's not a star, and I was not saying that he does not have the potential to be the greatest shooting guard of all time when it comes to the Phoenix Suns. What I simply was saying is, as of yet, he is not in the top five. If you're building a starting lineup of greatest Suns at each position, he's not there yet, especially if you're going to be able to shift one of the all-time great point guards there. I mean, you're talking about Steve Nash, Hall of Famer. Kevin Johnson's a borderline Hall of Famer. Guys that won in the playoffs. You're looking at it. I'd even argue Paul Westphal probably deserves the shooting guard spot before Devin Booker at this point. And that's not saying with another few years Devin wouldn't be there. But I'm not letting recency bias make my decision on an all-time list. Just because Devin Booker's been great so far.
Maybe we should actually just stay with the all-time list instead of you making your argument. Let's go with what the all-time list was that ESPN gave. An all-time starting lineup, which means a representation at each of the positions. Steve Nash and Kevin Johnson were the guards. Walter Davis and Charles Barkley were the forwards. And Amari Stoudemire was put in there at center because he played center during the 7 seconds or less. So Steve Nash had two MVPs as a point guard starting for the Suns. Charles Barkley had one MVP as a power forward starting for the Suns. Kevin Johnson made 3 All-Star games and 5 All-NBA teams. Walter Davis made 6 All-Star games and 2 All NBA teams. And Amari Stoudemire was with the Suns 5-5, 5 All NBA, 5 All Star, and one more of each when he went with the Knicks after signing that fully guaranteed $100 million contract that he earned about $20 million of. So we've got an all-time starting 5 for the Phoenix Suns that ESPN put out, and we're arguing whether anybody else should be in that lineup. Booker, I think maybe someday, but gosh, when you're going up against a pair of guards that one of them has 2 MVPs and another one has 3 All-Star games and 5 All-NBA teams, Devin Booker just isn't there yet.
Exactly.
It doesn't mean he won't get there, but he isn't there yet. He has 1 All-Star game. He possibly, maybe, on a very small chance, might make All-NBA this year. That means you've got to be one of the top 6 guards in the entire league. I don't know that he's going to do that. I'm pretty sure he won't, actually, because they didn't win enough games. But I certainly think Devin Booker has a huge future and could be one of the greatest Suns of all time by the time he's done. But as of now, he is not deserving of an all-time starting 5. That's a little bit too insulting to the rest of the point guards and guards that have played for the Suns. I mean, you could make a case that Paul Westphal should be in there because he led the team to the finals once, and he had several All-Star games as well. Other arguments for the Suns' all-time starting 5, I mean, where's Shawn Marion? Shawn Marion had 4 All-Star games and 2 All-NBA teams. And while he didn't make all defense for some strange-ass reason, he did finish in the top 5 of Defensive Player of the Year voting, which has different voting than All-Star or All-NBA teams, a couple of times. And so Shawn Marion is actually the first alternate on that team. And I would actually think about putting him in ahead of Walter Davis. And not just because I didn't see much of Walter Davis's career. Just means Shawn Marion brought more to the table than Walter Davis ever did, I believe. And so I'd actually argue Shawn Marion should be in there with Nash, KJ, Barkley, and Stoudemire.
Yeah, I think it's pretty close with those 2 guys, and either is fine. I don't think there's an egregious. It's egregious that with either of them in there. But I agree, Shawn Marion perpetually is the underrated superstar of this Suns team. When he was here, it was the case. After the fact, it's the case. But that guy, borderline Hall of Famer, deserves to be in the Ring of Honor. If he's not in the top 5, he's number 6. He's your 6th man with this group. Shawn Marion, very, very underrated and very, very deserving of being praised as one of the best Suns of all time. And if you look at the all-time rankings and stats, he's up there with all these guys. The other guy you might be able to argue at center is Alvin Adams if you want to trying to shift Amari. But the problem is with Barkley, you're never going to put Amari at power forward, and Amari deserves his spot there. I mean, Alvin was a unique talent, but is not going to surpass Amari. Now, if we're looking for lifetime achievement awards, then you might go with the organization in multiple ways, kind of like the Basketball Hall of Fame does, where it's your overall career in basketball. Then Alvin has a stronger shot, especially with the Suns franchise. But certainly as a top 5 ever, I would think that you've got to you can't put him in that top 5. No, agreed. And I think there's a different debate if you're looking at most interesting lineup to put together to actually play a game, as opposed to this discussion, this hypothetical that ESPN put out there, which was simply the top 5 at each position of all time. Because if we're talking lineups to put together to try to win one game or one series, I probably put Devin Booker at shooting guard, because him with Nash make quite an interesting pairing. But top 5, he's just not there yet.
All right, so before we get into it, I do want to take a moment to thank a listener and to really pour one out for a listener as well, Jake Brogner, who's been a longtime supporter of the show. About a week ago, he lost his 11-year-old dog, Jaden, who passed away from blood cancer. She was an 11-year-old German Shepherd. Jake, we're very sorry to hear about it, and she looked like a beautiful dog, though.
Yeah, I'm sorry for your loss, Jake. That's awful when you lose a a longtime family member like that.
Sorry, Jake, but thank you for listening, and hope we can at least bring a little joy to you in a tough time, my friend.
What's going to be the joy is seeing the defense, Mr. Greg Esposito, defend Ryan McDonough and his impact on the culture and his people skills for the Phoenix Suns. So just to give you guys a reminder, as the defense and the prosecution are making their statements, they're going to have their opening arguments, and they're going to submit evidence, and then they're going to have their closing arguments as well. To put the questions into the chat as part of the jury, and when it's the appropriate time, I will go ahead and ask those questions for you. So this week is about did Ryan McDonough ruin the culture for the Phoenix Suns? Just to put some of the rules out there, either side can object, and I will rule whether the argument is allowed. Opening and closing arguments should go no longer than 5 minutes, and I do have the right to cut you off. The evidence is submitted for consideration, as we talked about already. Opening statement is going to go to the prosecution this week. Prosecutor, thank you so very much. You have 5 minutes starting now.
All right. I hope everybody's impressed with my full suit that I've got on today. This is the first time I've put on, for anyone who doesn't know, if you're watching this like 3 years from now, this is right in the middle of the pandemic. I haven't worn a jacket in 3 months, so I appreciate you guys' appreciation of my dapper skills. Thank you very much.
Objection, Your Honor. Nobody cares that Dave actually decided, or excuse me, the prosecution actually decided to dress like a human today.
Overruled.
Thank you, Tim. So I've got 5 minutes for my argument. Gosh, this is about whether Ryan McDonough ruined the culture and basically had awful people skills. I don't even know that I need 5 minutes for this opener, but I'll just give you all a quick recap. We've got a guy who the very first time, and this is when we were all still in the honeymoon phase, and we thought Ryan McDonough was great, and we called him McStunna and all that. He literally came into his first summer saying, my job is to upgrade the talent on this roster and to make this roster a better roster top to bottom. As it turns out, he probably had more talent the day he started than the day he left, but the defense was able to argue that 2 weeks ago and won over the live jury. Although when I posted a vote on brightsideofthesun.com, I won decidedly, of course.
Objection, Your Honor. We do not care about Bright Side of the Sun in this trial.
Yeah, okay. Brightsideofthesun.com is the best place for all Suns coverage. Okay, first summer he said, we really need to upgrade the roster. Then he had a great, wonderful Cinderella season, and then he destroyed the team by letting Channing Frye go. Channing Frye is one of the greatest guys ever to play basketball for the Phoenix Suns as a person. He recovered from a heart condition, and he came back to play the entire 13-14 season. And between him and Goran Dragic, became one of the best pick and roll or pick and pop duos in league history at 1.3 points per pick and pop. And it was just amazing to watch. And then they just froze him out after the season was over, and they said, "Nah, we don't need you. We're going to let you go because we're going to shoot for somebody who would never come to Phoenix, which is LeBron James." Then he's got the trade deadline of 2015. Well, first he brings in Isaiah Thomas to totally ruin the point guard culture while re-signing Eric Bledsoe and keeping Goran Dragic. And then he's okay with Dragic being a small forward most of the next 3 months. And then Dragic insists on being traded. Isaiah Thomas was bitching and moaning, so he gets traded. And so McDonough trades 2 of his 3 point guards from the Hydra in 5 minutes. And then after the trade, what does he say? We got the best player coming or going, and Brandon Knight. Who remembers Brandon Knight, by the way? Isaiah Thomas made an all-star game. Goran Dragic made an all-star game after that. Brandon Knight is an all-star of knee procedures, possibly. I don't know which all-star team he's going to make, but it's certainly not an NBA Plan 1. And the best game he had after leaving the Suns, Brandon Knight, by the way, was against the Suns about 2 months ago in a surprising win for his Cleveland Cavalier team. Okay, so you've got no, sorry, Detroit Pistons. So you've got just a guy ruining the culture. He traded away some good players. He had people insisting on going out.
Objection, Your Honor. This isn't about transactions. This is about culture. And
no, this is the culture of people demanding to leave after having starting positions for an NBA team.
Overruled.
Thank you. Demanding to leave. I don't want to be here. I don't trust this team anymore.
You have 1 minute.
It's a brothel on 2 wheels. Remember that? I mean, come on. This is crazy. This is nuts. Even Jared Dudley probably thinks it was a terrible chemistry situation here, and he's the one who tried to help right the ship, and the ship was not rightable. So I just think it's really a slam dunk, and this is going to be the easiest of the 3 arguments for me these last 3 weeks.
Are you done?
Yes.
Okay. You need to make some sort of statement, prosecutor, that says that you are...
I have finished my opening statement. Now the defense can make an attempt to gaslight you.
Overruled. Defense?
So you're not going to let the defense go then?
You have 5 minutes.
The Honorable Bill Nye, thank you for providing me with my opportunity to speak. I'm just a simple, small-town, frozen caveman lawyer. I do not understand your big ways or what the prosecutor is trying to do here. This is pretty simple when it comes down to it. If we're talking culture and who ruined it, that happened long before Ryan McDonough ever walked into the doors at Talking Stick Resort Arena, or whatever it was called at the time. I believe it was the U.S. Airways Center when he walked in the doors. And when you look at it, this culture was set back by the previous regime. In particular, and we talked about him in the first phase of this trial, Lance Blanks, who said, "We're not ever going to talk about the past of the Phoenix Suns. Remove anything that talks about the past of the Phoenix Suns. Charles Barkley, Steve Nash, the 1976 team, take it all out. None of this on level 0, which is where the players practiced. None of it down near the locker rooms. None of it. Those people never won anything. I'm not talking about any of them. Forget about the past. This franchise will not discuss its culture or what was built previous to me being here." And that is literally the way that went down, right? And that was the beginning of the end for the Phoenix Suns culture when you looked at it. Everything about the past was pushed out, right, and in that moment. And it had started prior to that. Ownership, obviously not a big fan of Jerry Colangelo, so a lot of things were pushed in that way. But that was really the moment when you let Steve Kerr, one of the greatest all-time human beings and minds in basketball that understands people, go. You let Rick Welts leave at that point, and then you bring in Lance Blanks to run the basketball side of things. That was the moment that the Suns culture was ruined. It was long before Ryan McDonough walked into the room that the Suns culture was ruined. There were issues long before Ryan McDonough came in here, all right? He had a lot of mess to clean up. Culture issues, if you want to talk locker room, the Morai were here long before Ryan McDonough showed up. That was a culture issue. That was a locker room poisoning. That was a problem, right? Those are issues. Lance Blanks ran off Alvin Gentry, who was a great person and locker room person. That was a person that helped define culture even within the chaos of a Lance Blanks run front office, right? They let him go. They replace him with Lindsey Hunter. Lindsey Hunter, one of the worst coaches of all time, and pretty crappy human being who stabbed his head coach in the back so he got the opportunity to become the interim head coach. That is culture problems. That is deteriorating the bedrock of what a organization is built on, right? When you look at it, the Phoenix Suns were at bankrupt when it came to culture when Ryan McDonough walked in. Now, you can argue, did he make it much better? Yeah, That's an argument that I'm sure the prosecution will get into. But if we're talking about who ruined the culture, it happened long before Ryan McDonough. This culture was ruined previous to Ryan McDonough, and Ryan McDonough was trying to rebuild what he could. He reinstated
1 minute.
things from the past. He brought that back into the locker room. He brought people back around the franchise from previous regimes. He even brought back a great son in Jeff Hornacek to try to reinstill some of the previous culture. Were there issues? Yes. Communication is something that is an art form, but it's a two-way street. It comes from players have to communicate with the front office has to communicate with players, and that's a two-way street. You can't just hang that on one guy. Oh, and when you have an ownership or an owner that puts goats in your office to let them crap there, think about it. It's a bizarre culture even without the general manager being involved in it at that point. So overall, I will prove throughout this phase of the trial that culture was defined and destroyed long before Ryan McDonough took charge. I rest my opening statement, Your Honor.
Thank you, defense. We do have a question from a member of the jury. This is from MT defense, or from MT, excuse me. This is directed to you, Mr. Esposito. He says, you stated that the culture was ruined before Ryan McDonough, that's edited right there, came to Phoenix. What specifically did he do to improve the culture?
Well, like I mentioned, he brought back in embracing the past, right? In particular, the guys like Steve Nash and also Charles Barkley, the greats. What this organization was built on. He embraced that, and he brought it back in, and they put it back on the lower level, and they put it back in the locker room, and it was a reminder of these are the guys that you are trying to live up to. This is what the standard was set at. All right, so that was a big part of trying to bring this back. He brought, he kept guys around the organization like Mark West and brought Jeff Hornacek back, and maybe it didn't end in the way that it was supposed to with Jeff Hornacek in particular. But if you look at it, he tried to embrace what made this franchise, this city special, and that was key. He also brought an understanding of championship culture, having been with the Celtics for as long as he had, and he tried to instill certain things. But the problem is, if you're trying to instill a championship culture, it starts at the top, and you have to all believe in and buy into what you're trying to do. Culture is not a one-person thing. It's an entire organization, and everybody needs to row in the same direction. If you're not, you just spin around in a circle and you accomplish nothing. And that was part of the problem here. He had a vision. He tried to instill it, but without an entire organization believing in it, buying into it, doing exactly what's necessary to create that culture, you don't get there.
Thank you very much, defense. Also, thank you to the jury for submitting their question. The jury, we are going to move on to the evidence phase of this, where the prosecution and the defense have their turn to submit their evidence for your consideration. If you do have any follow-up questions for either the prosecution or the defense, simply put it in the chat to the side, and I will make sure to ask on your behalf. Both defense and prosecution have 8 minutes to submit their evidence. We're going to start again with the prosecution. Prosecutor, it's now your opportunity.
Apparently, the prosecution fell asleep, Your Honor.
Okay, let's go ahead and go with the defense then, while we figure out where the prosecutor went.
He may have pressed mute.
Defense.
Oh, sorry. I have myself on mute. I apologize. Man, I started talking and everything. I'm like, why aren't they listening to me? Okay. All right. So thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, jury. Thank you. No, never mind. No thank you to the third person. Okay, we are now going into the evidence portion of this trial, this charge. This charge is, did Ryan McDonough ruin the culture? The charge is that Ryan McDonough ruined the culture of the Suns. The defense is trying to tell you that the culture was already ruined, him coming in. And that is True, but the job of the GM, the job of the number two man in the entire organization is to make the culture better, make it a professional culture, make it a place that people want to be. You remember the past. I remember the past. People wanted to come here to play for the Phoenix Suns. It was a place that people wanted to be. Now it's a place people, until Ryan McDonough left, it became a place people wanted to leave. I mean, as much as we didn't like the Morris brothers, they wanted to leave so badly that they made it a clown show in public social media and all that. And guess what? They have not been problems in any of their future locations. They made Ryan McDonough made Goran Dragic want to leave. No one in the history of the world has made Goran Dragic want to leave their presence. He's such a nice guy. He is the greatest, nicest individual that I've met. And he suddenly turned on the Suns. You know why? Because he said Ryan McDonough promised him that he would get his starting job back after McDonough brought in Isaiah Thomas and re-signed Eric Bledsoe to start ahead of him, to play ahead of him in the guard positions, and shoved Goran Dragic to a corner spot in the small forward on that lineup. Ryan McDonough made promises all fall that he would rectify the situation that he created. And Dragic finally ran out of patience and demanded a trade at the trade deadline. Then what did Ryan McDonough do? Instead of going, okay, fine, I'll make it work for you. No, he traded Goran Dragic away. One of the nicest guys in the history of the franchise. This was after letting Channing Frye go. Another one of the nicest guys in the history of the franchise. Just let him walk without even talking to him in the offseason. They made a terrible contract offer to Channing Frye to come back that was insulting, and Frye had to leave. And that's just the beginning. Isaiah Thomas, after feeling welcomed in the sales pitch, never felt welcomed after while playing for the Suns. The Morris brothers wanted to leave. You've got so many people who wanted to leave, and everybody felt disenfranchised, felt disconnected. And then you know what? The only one who was kind of happy throughout the entire time he was actually here was Eric Bledsoe. But let's recap what happened to Eric Bledsoe. First of all, in his first summer after exploding onto the scene and helping the Suns go, I believe it was 23-8 with him and Goran Dragic in the starting lineup. Eric Bledsoe missed the rest of that, or most of the rest of that season, that first season, while Dragic tried to carry the team. And then what happened? There was a whole summer freeze out of Eric Bledsoe holding out for a max contract that he probably should have just been given on day one. And the Suns were unable to make that happen. So they had to fill in with Isaiah Thomas as a maybe backstop for injuries, which I at the time argued that was probably a good idea. But nobody set the expectations properly to make sure Isaiah Thomas was okay coming off the bench. If Eric Bledsoe re-signed and Goran Dragic was in the starting lineup with him, such a convincing starting lineup. And then Eric Bledsoe plays very well for the Suns. Almost, is worthy of all-star consideration. And what does Ryan McDonough do? He sits him down for the second half of Bledsoe's best season ever and tells him he's not going to play for the last 30 games because they want to lose games. How'd that make Bledsoe feel? I remember Espo, and Espo's not going to bring this up because he's not arguing this side of the coin today. He brought Eric Bledsoe onto a radio podcast that spring, and Bledsoe said that he was offended by being sat down for the rest of that season. He was unhappy with it. He was uncomfortable with it. And guess what happened after that? Bledsoe had one more kind of quiet season, and then he demanded a trade. As a starting point guard of a team that was supposed to be up and coming, with a team with a good future. Demands a trade. Aligns himself with the coach, aligns himself with his agent, and goes against the Suns. That is terrible culture. Ryan McDonough had no ability to do. And I haven't even touched on that 2015 trade deadline, on Ryan McDonough getting into a press conference and saying he's got the best player coming and going in Brandon Knight after trading away two future All-Stars in Goran Dragic and Goran Dragic and Isaiah Thomas. And now Eric Bledsoe is he's going to make an all-defense team for the second time probably. With the Milwaukee Bucks after being traded. All these good players insist on leaving. You've got a culture problem. Everyone knows they've got a culture problem. And Marcin Gortat talks about it in history. Now, he was here with the prior regime, of course. He was here with Babby and Blanks, and he called it a brothel on two wheels. Well, you know what? The Suns didn't get any better. It just didn't get any better, and it was Ryan McDonough's job to make it better. Let me show you evidence that Ryan McDonough could have made it better. You can argue that somebody else was in charge of this team and is the reason that the Suns are worse. But guess what? James Jones has suddenly made things better. We can all see it. Everyone knows that James Jones made the team better, and all he did was replace Ryan McDonough.
Objection, hearsay. It's not the case, but
James Jones has made the team better. You cannot object and overrule yourself. Be quiet over their defense. You've got it. You've got James Jones actually making the team better and more believable, more professional. People love playing for this team, and they want to stay playing for this team. And all it took was one person change. That's my evidence. I don't need any more evidence than that.
Okay, so you're resting your argument for now?
I am resting my argument for now. Exactly. I don't even think I need to make any more arguments. Well, I mean, if you're going to give me more time, I'll just talk about Brandon Knight some more. He was supposed to be the best player coming and going.
Objection.
You already rested.
No, I'll just keep going. If you're not gonna like jump, I'll keep going if you want me to.
I'll jump. It is now the defense's turn. Defense, you now have 8 minutes to submit evidence. Just a reminder to people watching live, you are the jury. If you do have a question for either the prosecution or the defense, so put it in the chat, and I will ask following the evidence portions of the trial. Defense, you now have 8 minutes.
The prosecution is going to try to hoodwink and bamboozle you here. He tries to tell you that in 1 year, James Jones has had more success than Ryan McDonough. I'd like the jury to think back to the first year of Ryan McDonough's tenure, a 48-win season, one of the most exciting we've seen in over a decade in Phoenix. The team loved each other. Everybody had a great time. They just barely missed the playoffs, being the most wins ever in NBA history not to make the playoffs. So if there's an argument about one season that we're going to make here in the culture, Ryan McDonough had a significantly better first season than James Jones did. So just to make that point, if we're going to play small sample size theater here, what the prosecution also forgets is the fact that it was not just Ryan McDonough. He said, Ryan McDonough, number 2 in the organization, should be able to make an impact. Well, for a big portion of it, he wasn't even number 2. He was number 4 on the org chart behind Lon Babby, who was the president of basketball operations, and the president of business operations, Jason Rowley, and obviously the owner in Robert Sarver. And we have not talked about Robert Sarver yet for majority of this. Who sets the culture? It starts at the top. It permeates all the way down through an organization. And having seen Robert Sarver, I truly believe he wants to win, but he gets he messes things up along the way. He interjects himself in deals. He interjects himself in promises with players. He interjects himself with coaches in coaches' offices after games. That's a big problem of culture. You can't ignore a major factor like that when it comes to how you're defining a culture. It undermines somebody like a general manager who's trying to make changes. And when the honeymoon phase is over for any GM, like it wound up being for Ryan McDonough, it becomes increasingly difficult to define a culture when the guy at the top is trying to define it himself. And that doesn't mean the guy at the top isn't trying to do what is right in his mind. It just means if you're not in alignment, neither person is going to get what they want out of the situation, because there is a fundamental misalignment at that point, and you can't build culture when there's a fundamental disalignment from people at the top of your organization. That is a major pillar here, right? And if we're talking about, did Ryan McDonough ruin the culture, the prosecution admitted the culture was ruined before he got here, that Ryan McDonough didn't necessarily fix it, but he did not ruin it. So if the charge is, did he ruin the culture, the answer is no. That goes strictly to the previous general manager in Lance Blanks, who wound up taking a roster that had multiple Hall of Famers. It had Steve Nash. It had Grant Hill. It had leadership. It had a head coach in Alvin Gentry who was good at leading the way, and he wound up devolving it into exactly what Marcin Gortat called it, a brothel on two wheels. You had Lindsey Hunter as a head coach. You had Michael Beasley as your star. Like, that's where culture goes awry. When somebody totally dismantles what had a strong culture, replaces it with a sideshow, and then leaves it for the next guy to clean up, and leaves parts that become a large part of the unrest in a locker room and the morai there for the next general manager. That's where culture goes off the rails, and it's much tougher, or it's much easier to destroy culture initially than to rebuild it after the fact. And that's what Ryan McDonough was tasked with, and tasked with doing it with a structure in the organization that made it difficult in and of itself. Because as much as I like Lon Babby, a strong personality, a guy who very much had his own philosophy on what culture was. The 5 Ps he preached all the time. You had Robert Sarver, who had a different mindset of what culture was from when he was running a bank. And then you had Ryan McDonough coming in with championship experience in Boston, who had a thought of what culture was himself. And establishing it takes more than one guy, and ruining it took one guy to do a lot of it in Lance Blanks prior to Ryan McDonough getting here. The prosecution brings up the fact that, Eric Bledsoe requested out. Well, we've talked about this on this show previously, right? That it wasn't actually Ryan McDonough why Eric Bledsoe asked out. Ownership, Eric Bledsoe said he wanted a new contract. He still had 2 years left on his deal, right? Money decisions run through ownership. It's not just the general manager making the decision. So they said no. So then ownership, unbeknownst to basketball operations, goes to head coach Earl Watson and says, you got to fire Rich Paul. Rich Paul, who was the agent for Watson and for Bledsoe. Rich Paul, a guy who's known for meddling within organizations and kind of messing up culture in some of the places that he's meddled with. They wind up doing that. Earl Watson basically tells them to blow smoke. Eric Bledsoe catches wind of it. He demands a trade because now you're strong-arming a coach to fire an agent that the player has because the player asked for a contract. That's a mess. Guess what? The general manager had very little to do with that situation, right? Very little to do with one of a culture impacts. You bring up Channing Frye as well, the prosecution does. Channing Frye was coming off major heart issues and surgery, right? And investing long-term and $35 million in Channing Frye was a questionable basketball move. Just because of the health. There were so many questions about his health. There was a chance that the first year Ryan McDonough was here, he wasn't even going to play. That's how bad the heart condition was. It wasn't until media day that it was announced that it actually that he actually was going to play that season. So that wasn't a culture thing. That was a questionable health and basketball move. You don't invest long term in an asset that you're not sure can actually even play. So that, to me, that's not a culture thing. Prosecution brings up Marcin Gortat. I've talked to Marcin Gortat. He's told me before that it was not Ryan McDonough that he ever had an issue with here in Phoenix. Culture is very difficult. Communication is a two-way street, and there's multiple people involved in that in an organization. Was Ryan McDonough perfect? No. I've never argued in any of this case that Ryan McDonough was perfect in any of these factors. But he was playing with a stacked deck. And he made his own mistakes. There's no denying that. There were issues. Isaiah Thomas, he never should have signed. He admitted that as much as himself that was an issue, and that if he could take it back, he likely wouldn't have signed him, and they would have figured out a way to make Dragic and Bledsoe work. And Dragic has never said who made the promise to him.
Objection for begging. Don't say please.
It was more like, oh, please, you're ridiculous, prosecution, not as in begging. So, look, in the end, if the charge is, did Ryan McDonough ruin the culture? No, You can't ruin something that was already cratered and destroyed by the time you got there. You can try to make it better. You can wind up failing at making it better and keeping it where it is, but the culture was already ruined when Ryan McDonough got there, and I think the evidence shows that, as well as personal experience and my knowledge of the situation from the inside. I rest.
Thank you very much.
Rest my case.
We do have follow-up questions from the jury before you both submit your closing arguments. Just a reminder for anybody watching, the closing arguments are on the entire trial, not just today. Both the defense and the prosecution will have 8 minutes, but let's go ahead. Let's get these questions answered first. You both have 30 seconds to answer each question. The first one is for the prosecution. This is coming from Pat. He says, don't you think that Ryan just didn't have luck after his choices?
Well, that's the culture part. You make the choices, and then you make the choices work out with the team. The whole problem is the culture, that these choices did not work out. Could Alex Len have been a better player? Maybe, maybe not. Alex Len, some players put their own limits on themselves. I've always argued that. However, the culture did not allow these guys to succeed at all. The culture is changing out your coach every year. The culture is hanging Jeff Hornacek, one of the most liked guys in the history of the NBA, to twist in the wind. He fired Hornacek's assistant coaches the month before he finally fired just Hornacek, and then put in the Earl Watson as the interim after that, who had joined the team off on the end of the bench. So culture is what makes choices work out or fail. And so no, that's my argument, is it's Ryan McDonough's fault that he had this bad luck, so to speak, after his choices were made.
Question for the defense. This is coming from P-Dog. Again, 30 seconds. How can you justify the Archie Goodwin selection in the 2013 draft among many terrible draft picks by Ryan?
Well, that's not a culture. I think that was established in the previous thing. But that was end of the first round. It's a crapshoot. He may have had bad judgment in picking Archie Goodwin from a basketball perspective, but I don't think that defines culture in any way. You look at it, and there were a lot of misses from multiple GMs in that first round. When you're looking at, I believe it was pick 28, or I think they traded for 27 with Golden State. It's just, I don't think that can define culture. It's a mistake from a pick-wise, but again, end of the first round is a crapshoot regardless.
Last question. This one is for the defense. This is from Rick Johnson. Why fire Hornacek, a guy who was a winning player and proved he could get good things out of guys and was still winning before the myriad of trades in his second year as head coach?
Can you repeat that? It cut out on me.
Sure. Rick is asking, why fire Hornacek, who was a guy, a winning player, and proved that he could get good things out of guys and was still winning before the myriad of trades in his second year.
So the reason that Hornacek got let go is because the Morai basically ran rampant in the locker room and kind of messed with his ability to lead that group. There was just a loss of respect from half of the locker room because the Morai had kind of poisoned the well when it came to that, which put Jeff Hornacek in an impossible position. And when a coach loses the locker room, I don't believe you have much choice but to replace him or replace the entire roster, and you're not going to be able to replace an entire roster as much as you could try, well, kind of flying the plane. So I think it was a necessary evil in terms of that because of other people that had poisoned the locker room.
Thank you. Okay, so now the prosecution and the defense will give their closing arguments, 8 minutes each, for the entire trial. This is the part where we need the jury to either convict or not convict Ryan McDonough of the Phoenix Suns. So, as the defense, who is going to go second, is getting close to being done, we're going to ask whether or not Ryan McDonough is guilty, and then the jury is going to decide. It does not have to be unanimous because otherwise we would have no decision. So let's go ahead and let's start. Prosecution, you now have 8 minutes for your closing arguments on the trial of Ryan McDonough.
All right. So to recap, the trial of Ryan McDonough, the first charge that we debated 2 weeks ago was, did he leave the team in a better place than when he started? And while the votes in the actual chat of that video, you guys were won over by Espo's argument that McDonough left the team in a better place because of Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton. He actually left the team in a much worse place. There were all-stars on the team that he got rid of, either through bad culture, bad transaction management, bad everything, than he ever acquired for the Suns. He started with a much better team, even though they weren't winning, and he left with a team that has a chance to maybe one day, with somebody else putting the rest of the roster together, to become better. So that first charge was whether Ryan McDonough left the team in better place than when he started in 2013. The second charge was whether he was good at the transaction game, whether he had any ability to be a GM with his transactions. I just killed Espo in that section because it was just the facts are the facts. He did a terrible job in making a selection, making his trades, and doing his free agency signings and all that. He was terrible at it. It's not even easy. It's not even hard. It's really easy. It's not even hard for me to make that argument. It was just kind of a slam dunk the entire time. Now, after you have the did he leave the team in a better place argued through, and then did he draft, trade, and free agent his way into a better team at any point? That argument's over. Now we're talking about, what did he do with those players? What happened with those players after he drafted, traded for them, and free agented them? And what he did was he ruined them. He is the head of the snake. He's the one who hired all the coaches. He's the one who hired the player development team staff. He always allowed the team to hire a coach that had never been an NBA coach before. The assistant coaches were kind of ragtag, come and go. He never allowed any kind of authority to happen, any kind of hierarchy structure to happen. And then the players ran rampant. You talk about bad eggs. Andy Buckdog in the comments talked about bad eggs in the organization. Well, guess what? Ryan McDonough brought those bad eggs in, and then he didn't manage them. He didn't actually get them into positions to succeed where they wouldn't complain. So many of the team's best players wanted out the entire time. That is evidence of a bad culture. That is evidence of bringing in the wrong players, and that is evidence of leaving the team worse than when you started. There's an argument in here that the culture was already ruined before McDonough got here. Well, you know what? He made it worse. The Suns became a laughingstock. They became where you didn't want to hear a national media person talking about the Suns because it would be a joke while Ryan McDonough was in charge. He was the head of this snake. He was the one who had his shit-eating grin all over the media and talking about how he was going to make the team a better team, and they weren't a better team. He never made them better. He never improved that mess that he started with. He actually left it worse. I think it's just ridiculous to argue that it wasn't his fault. And let me give you the best example to prove that it was his fault over everybody else. Is just all James Jones had to do was come in and just be normal. All James Jones had to do was come in and just not lose every freaking transaction he ever made. All James Jones had to do was come in and respect people. He talked the owner into hiring a coach and paying him for 5 years with a 5-year guaranteed contract, so there's a little bit more stability. He talked the owner into hiring a coach with experience that everybody would respect. He created a culture of respect. Frank Kaminsky, who would very easily and should be easily wanting to go to another team to give him a better opportunity, Frank talks constantly about how he wants to stay with the Suns long term. It's not about money. Of course, everybody needs a little bit of money, but it's not about money. Frank wants to be in this culture. He mentioned that the Suns have a good culture now with James Jones. The only thing that's changed is Ryan McDonough's gone. So when Ryan McDonough leaves and the culture gets better, that is perfect evidence that he ruined the culture of the team. His transactions are terrible. His tenure was terrible. We tried to talk ourselves into it. We tried to like the fact that he brought in he froze out Lon Babby. And you know what? Lon isn't perfect, but at least Lon really meant well to the organization. He's still around. I've still seen him at games, and he still helped reset the culture after Ryan McDonough left. And guess what? Lon got frozen out by Ryan McDonough. Ryan McDonough talked Robert Sarver into letting Lon go and letting Lon quietly retire, and things got worse after that happened. So you change one guy out, Ryan McDonough for James Jones, things get better. That's perfect evidence, and that's the only argument I need to make.
Thank you, prosecution. Evidence, you now have your turn, 8 minutes, your closing statement for the entire trial of Ryan McDonough.
So the argument that the prosecution just made is things got better when Ryan McDonough left, which is borderline acceptable. So an owner gets smarter to not go cheap on hiring coaches and finally learns from his lessons. And that's supposed to be on the previous guy who tried to convince him to hire guys with experience, and he was never willing to open the wallet. How is that on the previous general manager? That seems to be on the guy that makes the financial decisions and not the previous general manager. Also, you know why things are easier for James Jones? Because Ryan McDonough built the foundation for him, so James Jones could come in and hire and sign a few fringe guys to make the bench better, and all of a sudden this team's better.
Objection to the use of the word foundation.
Foundation: Devin Booker, Mikal Bridges, and DeAndre Ayton, which is an argument that was established in the first part of this case, which I won, by the way, that Ryan McDonough left the team better than when he got here, which makes it easier for James Jones to come in and tinker with things and Dave to praise him as if he's made every change that made all the difference. Ryan McDonough, as we established, left this team in a better place roster-wise than it was when he arrived. Now, in the second part, and I admitted it even as the defense, transactions, there were questionable transactions along the way. But that does not change the fact that he left the team in a better place roster-wise, with a future, with the chance to win and potentially a championship with two potential superstars in Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton. And then you look at it, and the prosecution is trying to tell you that Ryan McDonough destroyed the culture. Lance Blanks pushed the Phoenix Suns franchise down the stairs. Ryan McDonough had to come at the bottom of the stairs and try to clean up the bloody mess. All right? That's where this is. And ownership plays a part too along the way. So you cannot convict a man of ruining a culture when somebody else ruined it, which the prosecution admitted, and he was trying to fix a broken system when nobody was in alignment as to what that culture was. If we're talking about ruining the culture, you cannot convict a man for trying to make it better in a messy situation. And maybe he didn't make it better, but he certainly did not ruin it. It was ruined when he walked in the door. So how do you convict a man for ruining something that was already a terrible, terrible situation? We're talking, again, when you look at it, Lance Blanks comes in and Steve Nash, Grant Hill, Alvin Gentry. You've got Hall of Famers, great coaches, a pretty solid setup. He tears that down, brings in Michael Beasley, brings in the Morai, brings in Lindsey Hunter as a coach. You want to talk about tearing down and chiseling at the bedrock of a foundation and a culture, stripping away the history of what made this team great in terms of the Steve Nashes, the Charles Barkleys, the reason most of us are fans, and Lance Blanks wanted you to forget about all that and wanted the players to ignore that ever happened here, right? When that is what you do and that is what you walk into, as Ryan McDonough did, it is an uphill battle the entire way. And he, as we established in the first part of the trial, he made the roster better. In the end, he left James Jones with a better team than he did. And by the way, there was a culture of I don't want to say, man, you know what? I'll say it. There was a culture of stabbing people in the back that was established when Lance Blanks was here, because Lindsey Hunter undermined his head coach, right? Set it up. And that was a culture that started there, and I think continued where people were trying to undermine other people throughout future regimes as well. So when culture is established there, and it starts at the top and it works its way down. I don't know how much one man could have done to try to salvage a situation. And you cannot praise James Jones for the one season he's done without looking back at Ryan McDonough's first season and remembering how much we thought he was the savior that changed everything and that this team was finally going to be a perennial playoff team again. Things take time. Culture takes time. It takes time to destroy. It takes time to rebuild. The time that it took to destroy it was before Ryan McDonough got here. He attempted to try to rebuild it, and maybe it got slightly better. I don't think it got worse, and I don't think you can convict him of ruining a culture that was already ruined and gone by the time he came here. I rest my case.
So now we are going to go ahead and get votes. Again, this is on the entire trial of Ryan McDonough. Guilty or not guilty? We do need the jury to chime in. Just a couple of comments. I am a bit surprised that the defense did not mention in your closing argument that Ryan McDonough left the Suns with Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton, and a really great cap situation moving forward. When he received the Suns, to your point, which you did mention, Michael Beasley and Scola.
That wasn't the whole roster when he received this.
Well, when he was who was there when he received the Suns then?
Dragic was another one.
Goran Dragic.
Yeah,
I'm forgetting now, but
Yeah,
he had
because it
more
was
good
trash.
players on the roster that he inherited than the ones he's left.
No, he did not.
I already argued that.
Yeah, and you
I already
lost.
argued that.
You
That's already
lost
been argued.
impressively on that one, if you remember, Mr. Prosecution. So you should probably stick to your transaction argument.
All right, I'm looking it up, but it's too late now. We've already made
You
our
guys
arguments.
keep going. I am getting the votes from the jury.
Look, are we voting on that it's culture, that he ruined the culture, or some larger thing? Because we're getting a lot of roster comments as to why he should be guilty, which was established
We're
last
voting
time.
on the whole thing. This is a whole.
What?
This is
No,
a whole
why would
thing
we vote on the whole thing when everything else has been about each part of it? That's not fair. The case today is ruined. We're not
Tim
voting
already
the whole thing.
argued that. Tim already told us that this vote is for the whole thing.
Which I think is unfair. We voted on the other
You
two.
can't say that now.
One to one. This was the deciding if who made better arguments throughout.
But at the end of a trial, it's not
At
voted
the end of the
on
trial,
each
it's all
part.
charges.
it's each charge that you vote on. You don't vote as a whole. It's each charge that you're voted on. That's why you can be convicted of one thing and not others in a trial.
Guilty. Ryan McDonough was the guy who ruined this. Come on, this franchise is so much worse off with Ryan McDonough in charge the last few years. Come on, guys.
If Lance Blanks murders the culture and Ryan McDonough shoots the body again, he's not charged for murder, as the argument was made in the chat
The
by
whole thing
Steven.
is all three charges.
It's
Tim
not,
laid that
because
out
you get
here. The whole thing is all three charges.
No, you convict people on separate charges. That's why a guy can get off on one charge and go to prison for another.
Why
You
is
don't
it
vote as a
8:26
whole.
and why is it an hour into this thing and you're just now pointing this out? Tim has talked about this the entire time.
I'm just saying.
He does make a pretty good point, Espo.
No, well, that's rare, and Mr. Bill Nye.
Listen, the votes are still coming in.
You know what? I'd like to thank everybody for sticking with us through this entire thing.
Yeah, this has been great. You guys are awesome.
This is like basically going, hey, you went through a bad breakup, and now we want you to sit through 3 hours of us arguing about said bad breakup. So we appreciate you putting up with this and for encouraging us to finally dress like human beings for the first time in 3 months. That's been nice,
know.
too.
This is the first time I've put a suit on in 3 months. You guys got to give me props at least for that.
There have been,
and I comb my hair.
Yeah.
I'm usually in a hat.
There have been 3 hours since this pandemic started that I didn't wear a hat, and it's been the last 3 Saturdays during this case. So
No, I
thank
usually
you
just
for
walk
that.
around with crazy hair because I don't have to worry about it. But man, that's on the episodes I've been on the podcast. I've been wearing a hat for 3 years now. This is one of the. I can count on one hand how many times I've done one of these podcasts without a hat on in the morning. on the morning shows. You guys have only ever seen my hair on the evening shows.
Look, you guys have made me given me immense amount of confidence in this really long hair. I've never rocked it this long, but I'm feeling good about it.
I haven't had my hair this long, and you guys can't tell really on the pod, but on the YouTube. But I haven't had my hair this long. Since like the years my kids were being born. Since I was Greg's age, I guess.
We do have a comment by a member of the jury. This is from Rick Johnson. He said, McDonough not guilty on the first offense, leaving the team better than when he got here, but it took 6 years, so there's an asterisk.
Hey.
Yeah, good point.
The asterisks, it doesn't matter. The question is, did he or didn't he, not how long it took.
Fair.
Hey, just
guys,
like,
I can't
just
believe
like
you
in the
guys are just
bedroom, you're
trying
not
to-
judged
trying
on.
Not to remember the worst times.
I am a Ryan McDonough apologist, man. I'll always appreciate Ryan McDonough. He made some mistakes.
They're
but,
still voting Tim.
Yeah, well, no, they're done.
No, we just got another not guilty there, so.
Because some of them are just repeating.
Well, hey, count them each
did we get?
time. If you, hey, I'd like the podcast listeners to just imagine my hair like Fabio from the late 80s, early 90s. That's the way this hair looks. Those of you on YouTube, you can make your own decision, but that's
Hey, I'm trying
way
for
it
the
feels.
Tom Chambers look. I'm even trying to grow out the mullet in the back.
He's wearing the
So he
short
slicked it
shorts
back.
as well. It's great. He just
Yeah.
teabagged Mark Jackson. He's all in on the Tom Chambers thing.
I'm going for it. I'm going for the Tom Chambers look on the Suns post game shows. That's what I'm going for. I'm
that's
even
fair.
I'm going to get a deeper tan and longer hair, and yeah, this is all it's gonna be me and Tom.
We do have a decision. It looks like the largest amount of votes are going for guilty on Ryan McDonough. Yes, I find sad, but I think Espo that you did a fantastic job defending Ryan McDonough.
Granted, the
and
three of
Dave-
us voted 6 times each.
Let me say this. Dave was basically given kindergarten work, and I was given advanced calculus. And Dave barely passed
No.
his kindergarten work,
you were
and
just
I
given
figured out the
a
advanced
dud.
calculus.
A dud. It's like a firecracker that doesn't crack. I mean, you were given a dud. That doesn't mean it was calculus. That just means you were handed a dud, and your job was to try to talk us into the fact that it would go off if they bought it from you. So you were put in a job of being a used car salesman, and you somewhat succeeded. You even slicked your hair back for it, but really it was a slam dunk the whole time.
Dave did kindergarten work and barely passed. I did advanced calculus and almost figured it out. That's
It's
what
not
we're
advanced
talking about
calculus
here.
when you're told to sell a dead firecracker that it can actually blow.
Look,
So no.
MT said if I shave my head, he'll change his vote to not guilty.
On the show
Very
right
tempting.
now. Go get the
Very
Clippers.
tempting. I don't know
I
on
will
Clippers.
change my vote.
I
If
love-
you get the Clippers and shave your head right now.
I love Coach Fallen Founder wants to know. I said, I figured you were one of the German villains from the 80s Die Hard movie. Yes, I am Hans Gruber's cousin, hired to defend here. I enjoy this. This was fun, and thank you, because I needed a good laugh after a difficult evening last night. So thank you to the jury and everybody on the show. I appreciate it.
And now we have to come up with
didn't
content.
we have a bet that the loser of this actually does shave their head? I thought we had that bet.
There was no bet. No. What kind of idiot would go, hey, I'm going to give you the worst odds in the world, and we're going to have the same thing on the line for each of you. I'm not that dumb. I may be dumb, but I'm not that dumb.
Listen, you are both incredibly smart gentlemen. Appreciate everybody that's tuned in for the 3-part series. We'll be back next week with some sort of content. Not a clue what it is.
The trial
I'm
of
sure we'll be
Lance
talking about the
Blanks.
upcoming season that's going to be set.
Hopefully. Hopefully. But thank you all so very much for joining. We appreciate you, and we'll be back again next Saturday, 7 o'clock Arizona time if you're watching us live. Otherwise, whenever you feel like it on the podcast.